Shalom. The title of today's message is The Creator, or the Creator of the Universe. Today I'm going to describe the Creator in a way that will help you understand his existence a little bit better and what it actually means to create. So Yahweh is the Creator of the universe, and he goes by many names. Besides, of course, the name that he introduced himself with at Mount Sinai, which is Yahweh, written as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, pronounced as Yahweh today. That's the best we can because we don't really know how that's pronounced. His names are very descriptive and they reflect his character. The name we pronounce Yahweh means self-existent one, or one who exists. It's the ultimate display of his existence because he is eternal. He is without beginning. He is without end. He's without top or bottom or middle. He exists outside of time. He exists outside of time and space because he created time and space. So our Bibles at Exodus 13:14 say, I am who I am, when Moses presses Yahweh to say, who are you sending? Who am I to say is sending me? But the literal translations struggle to represent this accurately. Some say, I will be what I will be. Others, I am that which I will be. But the meaning behind what he says there, Asher Haya Asher, is self-existent one. It means that nothing can describe him. Nothing can tell you what he's about. He is the root and source of all power, authority, and material in the universe. He can't stop existing. He is the only self-existent being. And this belief that we have, this isn't even a belief, it's foundational for those of us who believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Yeshua. Christians, Jews, across the board, this is monotheism. So let's take a look at some slides today. Isaiah 40:28 through 29. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The everlasting Elohim, Yahweh, the creator of the ends of the earth, does not become weary or tired. His understanding is inscrutable. He gives strength to the weary, and to him who lacks might, he increases power. So another name for Yahweh is the Creator, which he is. Being self-existent and the possessor of all knowledge and power, he is the power that created the universe and all that it contains. Genesis 1:1 reads in Hebrew, Bereshit bara Elohim et shamayim v'et eretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That sentence is there for our sakes. That's not for anybody's sakes. Everything in the Bible, every sentence, every letter, every stroke from Genesis to Revelation is there for us to learn something. Yahweh decided that there was going to be a beginning because he doesn't have a beginning or an end. He decided there was going to be a beginning, and he wrote that sentence for us through his servant Moses. This earth, this creation, this universe has not always existed. It was made in the beginning. This earth has been destroyed once in a flood. That was an era, E-R-A. From Noah to Moses can be considered another era. From Moses to Yeshua, another. From Yeshua until his return, another. And then we're going to have the 1,000-year era, and then comes the end. We have a series of cycles of creation and destruction that teach us lessons, each era building upon each other, with the end being the destruction of this creation and replacing it with the perfect. Some say it will be a replacement of the garden, like a restoration, but I believe it's going to be much, much more. Yeshua said there are many mansions in my Father's house. He talked about the coming kingdom with a temple with structures and buildings and work to do. And in the garden, it was just Adam and Eve, no structures or the like. So I believe that while we do see restoration and cycles in the scriptures, that the actual 8th day is going to usher in something that nobody on this earth has experienced before. So going further in Genesis 1, the earth was formless and void. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and Ruach Elohim, which Holy Spirit, was moving over the surface of the waters. So when Yahweh decided to create, he created with chaos. He made raw materials. See, our Bibles don't do this justice. The beginning was Yahweh creating the raw materials for a universe, for a planet, as the evolutionists would say, a primordial soup. He created and he started a process. He created a mess of raw materials, and then he started ordering those raw materials into substance and space and time and sky and water and earth and life forms and sunsets and sunrises. He put the stars where they belong. He's an amazing figure, but again, he didn't have to do it like that. He could have just willed the universe into existence as it is today, or as it was 4,000 years ago. But these words in Genesis 1 and 2, they're there. These words, Devarim, these lines, these verses, are there to teach us how to walk out Yahweh's character. We're made in his image. That doesn't just mean like a facsimile or a photograph. It means that we are to emulate our Creator. Yahweh took his time with the raw materials. He enjoyed 6 days of work. He enjoyed it because every day he says it's good. It's very good. He enjoyed just creating electricity and electricity that exists in our bodies, that goes from our brain to our toes and tells us to do things. Electricity on a grand scale in the form of lightning bolts. He created light. He created darkness. He enjoyed the 6 days of creation, putting the universe in order, adding energy, setting things in motion. He took his time. He did not need to take his time. So for us, creating takes time. We are temporal creatures. We exist in space and time. So creating a blog, a scarf, building an automobile, learning a song, building organizations, all of these things take effort. They take vision. They take determination. This is a fundamental difference between believers, whether they are like us, or traditional Christians or traditional Jews, and the rest of the world. We understand that Yahweh made something out of nothing. That there was nothing except Yahweh, who has always existed, and he decided to make material. He decided to order the universe. It was purposeful. It was created. It was enjoyable to create it. The rest of the world believes that something came out of nothing as an accident. They believe that just spontaneously there was some explosion that created a cataclysmic event at some unspecified time in history, which put everything in motion to accidentally turn into what we have today. But that's absurd, because the same people who tell us that correctly tell us that order cannot come from disorder. It's an idea called entropy, that when you have chaos is always going to increase. As we look at the universe today through their lens, that the universe is expanding. As it expands, it devolves, and the orbits get more out of whack. Same with our planet. It's really interesting how the unbelievers accuse us of inconsistency when the fundamentals of their belief system are at odds with each other. Order cannot come out of chaos spontaneously. Order can come out of chaos if it was created. Creating takes planning and materials. You have to have a vision and acquire the necessary materials, apply skill to assemble, and then you end up with waste that needs to be managed. Years ago, when they built the house next door to ours here in the country north of Kansas City, they would burn the waste each day. Because try as you might, there are computer programs to say, I want to build a house, a 1,600 square foot house with 3 bedrooms, and there are programs that will tell you what boards to buy and how much sheetrock to buy and how much paint to buy. But you're still going to have a little bit extra. You still have to cut those boards down to size. So every day these guys who were building, they would burn the stuff up with tar and chemicals and whatever, because we live in the country where it's okay to do these things. And they would take their leftovers and they would just set them on fire and go home for the day. Well, here in 2 Peter 3:10 through 13, but the day of the Lord will come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be burned up. Since all these things are to be destroyed in this way, what sort of people ought you be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming day of God, because of which the heavens will be destroyed by burning, and the elements will melt with intense heat. But according to his promise, we are looking for new heavens and a new earth, in which righteousness dwells. This creation has waste. It didn't have to, but Yahweh creates things so that we can learn from him. And this waste will be allowed to build up until the very end. As Yeshua tells us that the wheat and the tares grow up together. This parable is literal, but it's also an analogy, a metaphor, and a prophecy. In life, when we build, we create waste. And sometimes pieces of the puzzle just don't belong with others. So maybe you are creating something and you end up with a pile of boards that you can use for another project to build a shed. But things fit in different fashion, in different ways, and sometimes things just have to be discarded. Our life is also a mess. Some people belong in some jobs, and some people belong in some relationships, and some not others. At the end of Genesis 1, Yahweh made man in his image. And the word man there doesn't mean male, it means mankind. Like anthropos in Greek means anthropology in English, it's talking about mankind. It includes women. And to be in his image doesn't mean just appearances. It means we're to build, we're to tend, we're to create, because that's what our Creator did. We're supposed to emulate him. And when we build, we have to plan. We have to tame some chaos and bring it into order. And we have to deal with waste and things that belong in other projects. Creating takes time and effort, planning materials. Creating is hard. When something is created, often it takes maintenance to keep up. The temple is a very good example of this. Yahweh allowed Solomon to build the house, which is what it was originally called. It's called a temple, but it's also called Beit Yahweh, the house of Yahweh. And it was a magnificent structure. But in order for it to happen, we had to have David, who had Solomon. Solomon had to have the right people around him. The granite had to be accessible. The ships had to be there to transport these giant timbers. The trees had to be perfect in Lebanon. All these things happen in due season. And with the craftsmen and the knowledge and the work and the effort and the wealth and things that it took place in order for that temple to be put together and assembled was immense. And it was a moment in time. But that moment in time built a temple that was a tool. It was the center of Yahweh's faith on the planet. It required maintenance, ongoing maintenance, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. Because the Torah establishes a culture where everybody has a stake in the game. You have the high priest who is supported by the Kohen. You have the Kohen are supported by the general Levites. The Levites are supported by the people, and the people even comprise proselytes and Gentiles who are visiting. So you have to have water in due season. You have to have grain that grows. You have to have animals. You had to have faith that the entire nation would do what they were supposed to do so they could donate 1/10 of their proceeds to the temple service, which could then be used to support the temple. And with all of these things flowing into the Holy of Holies, which was displaying our faith, mankind's faith to Yahweh, by everybody doing their part. It took a lasting effort. It took the nation obeying, and for all these things to work. So what happens when the people start straying? Because we don't think in our lives today that what we do amounts a hill of beans, but what we do does amount a hill of beans. What happens if a few people decide that they don't want to plant? Or some people decide they don't want to follow the Torah at all, and they stop work. And then the temple starts to lose some of the functions that it needs, some of the supplies that it needs to support the rest of the nation. So when the people start straying on the outskirts, it starts a cascading effect, which then brings the temple to uselessness. Because if the people stop doing it and that spreads, and the Levites don't get their supplies, they can't do their job, and the temple starts to get defiled. So its perfection is tarnished, and its functionality ultimately ceases. And then what happened? The people were carried off into exile and were destroyed, and the temple came down. This cycle of creation, obedience, sin, and then destruction repeats itself several times in the scriptures, culminating in the ultimate at the 8th day, at the end of the age. And this is a distinction between us and the world, because the world thinks the universe is accidentally improving over time. They believe that we are evolving into better or at least different beings. This is a difficult thing to describe when we don't believe it, but I even have this predisposition. As do most of us, all of us. We want our kids to have a better life than we had. So we try to educate them better than we did so they don't make the same mistakes we did, and they can make more money or have a better life, have bigger ministry, have bigger whatever as they move on. It's a good and wise philosophy. But as a species, we are not getting better. Adam and Eve were created perfect. Sin entered the world, which started a decaying process. Mankind is getting sicker. So is the planet. So is the ecology. So is everything. And for those, who think that we're evolving into something better, there's a lot of science fiction about this, where they believe that the smartest, wisest people are the ones who lived the longest and ascended into higher beings. But we don't ascend on our own into being higher beings. That's a gift from Yahweh. That eternal body that waits for us, eternal body to contain us, is something that's a gift that has to be given and we have to accept. So for those who believe in the Bible, we know that Adam and Eve were created as perfect immortal beings. And we believe that the future believers will have similar bodies, although and through sin, death entered the world, and this death is an increasing decay of our physical bodies and more. The flood changed the ecology of the planet. Prior to the flood, plants were watered by a mist. After the flood, rain is required for us to have drinking water for our crops to grow. Earthquakes, volcanoes, tidal waves, these are a result of the fall, the flood. We have a different planet today than Adam and Eve had. In fact, we probably have a different planet than Moses had. The planet was changed for the worse. It is not getting better. It is not evolving into a better atmosphere. It's interesting to know that many in our movement, the people in our movement, it's common for us to get this belief that if we were to return to the diet and lifestyle of Adam and Eve, or Moses, or some old, way of living, that we would achieve a better mortality rate. It starts to sound like people are trying to earn their salvation through their food. Now, it's natural for these ideas to creep in as we start sifting through the corruption of our present time. But we have to remember that Adam and Eve were not ever going to die without respect to their diet. Before the fall, if they were never going to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they never would have died. It wasn't because of the food that they consumed that they were going to live forever. And it wasn't because of the water. It was because of obedience and the way they were created. Now, while it is a commandment to eat according to Leviticus 11, and I do so, I do because the Bible says to eat clean food. And I do this. We should. But I don't do it for health reasons. I do it simply because the Bible tells me to do so. You can be 50 pounds overweight eating nothing but food that is in accordance with the Torah. You can have high cholesterol. You can have diabetes. There's no commandment against eating sugar. So this idea that the diet alone is going to have long lives is not it. What does the Torah say? What does Yahweh say about having a good life? It includes following all of the commandments. The one specific commandment about living a long life in the land that he was going to give us is about obeying our parents. That has nothing to do with food. That has to do with believing in our earthly parents as we believe in our Heavenly Father. So if we are to have long lives because of we keeping Torah, that's great. But we could also keep Torah and get hit by a bus. We have to do like Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. We have to obey the Torah regardless of earthly reward in this lifetime. We obey the Torah because Yahweh says to obey the Torah. I believe and encourage people to eat healthy, and I do eat as healthy as I can, and it may give us longer lives, but it's not going to stave off the eternal death. It's not going to guarantee our resurrection if we clean up our food. All of us, except a few chosen remnant, when Yeshua returns, are appointed to die once, so we will most likely suffer that first death. And so in blunt terms, I don't believe that the fruit of the tree of life will be available at any stores anytime soon. So Exodus 12, 21 through 28. Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go and take for yourselves lambs according to your families, and slay the Passover lamb. You shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood which is in the basin, and apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and the 2 doorposts. And none of you shall go outside the door of his house until morning. For Yahweh will pass through to smite the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, Yahweh will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to come into your houses to smite you. And you shall observe this event as an ordinance for you and your children forever. When you enter the land which Yahweh will give you, as he has promised, you shall observe this rite. And when your children say to you, 'What does this rite mean to you?' you shall say, 'It is a Passover sacrifice to Yahweh, who passed over the houses of the sons of Israel in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, but spared our homes.' And the people bowed low and worshipped. Then the sons of Israel went and did so, just as Yahweh had commanded Moses and Aaron. So they did." So we're going to return to the main theme of the message today about the Creator, and it's time to draw a contrast. What do we think of when we think of the destroyer? Because sometimes we explain things with parallels, and sometimes we explain things with opposites. We have a creator of the universe. Who is the destroyer? Satan comes to mind. Now, sometimes Yahweh does do destructive things to bring about the next era, or to punish people, or to teach things. But who was the agent of destruction in the garden? It was Satan. He deceived Eve knowing that death would enter the world. He didn't go about that destruction with a sledgehammer, or jackhammer, or dynamite. All he had to do, he knew when he told her, when he pushed her over the edge, she was already a little tempted. She was already looking at that tree, that forbidden fruit, and she said it was attractive, and he just nudged her right over the edge, knowing full well that her sin would start a cascading effect, with just a few pages later, Yahweh would have to destroy his creation because men's thoughts were evil continually. Satan is a liar, he's a murderer, he's a destroyer, and that's where he comes from. He wants to detract from Yahweh as much as possible. And I want to point out something here that's quite obvious to us. That building is significantly harder than destroying. I've articulated how Yahweh created the world and how the temple had to be maintained today. How hard was it for Satan to destroy Yahweh's creation? It was not that hard. All it took was one bite of the forbidden fruit for death to enter the world. And Evil is separation from Yahweh. Satan had succeeded. And it is interesting to note that Satan's destruction from that sin in the garden is part of the plan of salvation and will ultimately be used for good in the end. So now, and we do have to make note that Yahweh took no pleasure in destroying the planet and the creatures he created. So Passover season is upon us, and it is time for us to remove the leaven from our homes as a memorial to many things, not just the Exodus. It's a memorial to Abraham and Isaac. It's a memorial to the Exodus. It's a memorial to Yeshua's sacrifice. The murder of Yeshua, which was fomented by Satan, was also a requirement for the fulfillment of the plan of salvation. Yahweh uses evil for good pretty often. And the blood of the Messiah covers our sins, so we do not put blood on our doorposts anymore. But we do remove the leavening, which is an annual renewing process to remove the impurities that have built up in our lives and start fresh each spring. As we move forward with another blessed season, let's remember how precious the building and creating is. Let's keep working in the image of our Creator and be on guard against the destroyer. Shalom and have a good week.